So this shifter position and this bar rotation might look a bit extreme to some people, but you will be so surprised at the amount of times and the amount of people that we see in the Bike Fit studio who come in with these sorts of positions and are complaining of certain problems like neck pain, shoulder pain, hand pain, back pain. So we thought we'd put out a bit of content today to try and educate and help people get the right bar rotation and shifter position, and specifically talk about how that affects reach. So let's start by explaining what effect bar rotation and shifter position has on reach and why it can cause some of the problems it causes. So we've got this bar and this shifter set up in a way where it is extremely downwardly rotated through the bars, or forwardly rotated, and the shifter position on the bar is very low down on the curvature of the bar. And both of these two things together and in isolation causes longer reach and a bigger saddle to bar drop effectively, because your hand position comes right over the top of the bar onto the shifter and puts a hell of a lot of weight forward over the front end of the bike and onto the front end of your body. So with this bar and shifter position, it's going to cause a lot of stress through your upper body, obviously, but that amount of weight distribution tipped forward also makes your pelvis and your lower back have to lean further forward on the saddle to be able to compensate for that reach, and that's how it can cause a lot of back problems and even saddle problems. It can make the saddle pressure become very far forward and cause you to perch onto the nose of the saddle rather than getting a good contact onto the middle of the saddle. So most of the time when we see this sort of setup, it's because people have positioned them here without really realizing, or the shifter position on the bar means that you have to rotate the bar either forward or back to try and get the shifter in a decent enough position, which is not the right thing to do. Stay tuned and we'll tell you why. But a lot of the time I see it is also when new bikes have been set up in bike shops, unfortunately, and they've just come out of the shop like that, or they've been built by the mechanic and they've not really paid too much attention to where they're positioning the bar and the shifter. And, you know, annoyingly, that's not going to help that customer when they're buying that new bike enjoy their new bike experience. So that makes up the majority of the time we see these sorts of positions. So how should we set up a bar and a shifter in terms of rotation and hand position to make sure that everything's going to be as comfortable as possible on the front end? So the first thing I would concentrate on is the handlebar. I would ignore whatever the shifter position looks like right now and just make sure you get your bar set in a rotation that's suitable. And then once we've done that, we can get the shifter in the correct position for the bar. But we always want to start with the bar first. So using this bar in the way that it's set up now as an example, you can see a couple of things that we're looking for to know that the bar is in the incorrect position. One thing is the drop of the bar. So this bar drop actually rises upwards at the end, and really we always want that horizontal. Now this does depend on the bar, because some bar shapes or drop shapes mean that you're never going to get a decent horizontal drop position, and that's just the way that the handlebars are designed. I prefer a bar that is designed to have a horizontal drop, but that's just me. But that's one thing we want to look for to make sure we get a horizontal drop at the end of the bar. The other thing that should also be horizontal is the top of the bar. So you can see here as the bar sweeps around, it immediately drops down without having a flat section at the top where we want to transition into our shifter. So if I position this bar now where I would put it, I'm going to put it so that the first bit of that sweep around the corner of the bar is totally horizontal, and also because these bars are designed quite well, the drop of the bar is now also horizontal right at the end too. So now we've got our bar rotation set in a really nice position, we can now see that the shifter position is still a problem. So the shifter is set really low down through here because we've got a big drop off before we get to the shifter. Now, if you're doing this at home and rotating your bar so that the bar's horizontal, the shifter might just end up being in a really good position then, and it was just your bar rotation that was the problem. But until you've got that bar rotation set, you won't know. Now on these shifters, which is the new SRAM Rival shifters, and it's also true for the Force and the Red shifters, SRAM put a little mark on the hood covers so that you can see where the shifters should be set. Now these marks on the hood covers are designed for you to set them horizontal. So if these little lines are pointing down or up, then that's a good guide to tell you that your shifter's in the wrong position. The only trouble with these marks is that it obviously doesn't take into account bar rotation, which we've done, but just to tell you again the importance of making sure that the bar is set first before the shifter. Otherwise you could set the shifter horizontal, but your bar rotation's still way out. So the key thing that you're looking for with shifter position, once we've got our bar set, is that our shifter comes straight off the top of the bar. So we haven't got this dip down and then this gap between the top of the bar and the middle of the shifter. We want this transition into the shifter to be really smooth so that there's no hot spots or ridges or wells for our wrist and hand to fall into when we are putting our hands onto the shifters. So now we want to move our shifter. If we just peel back the hood cover, in here there's a little bolt just on the side or outside of the shifter that we can loosen off, and that'll loosen the clamp for the shifter onto the bar, so now it's nice and loose. So now we're going to position it upwards of the bar so we get that smooth transition along the top like we were saying earlier. So now we've moved the shifter up. If we take a horizontal off the top of the bar, you can see that lines up really nicely with our hood cover. So we've got a really smooth transition between bar and shifter. So when your hand's on that shifter, there's no ridges or gaps in there for any hot spots to occur on your hand. And obviously we've only done this on one shifter just for demonstration purposes, but you are going to want to do this on the other side as well and make sure that your shifters are symmetrical. The other thing we've not mentioned is shifter rotation. So look out for a separate video on that because we could go deep into the rabbit hole thinking about all types of shifter rotations and why you might want different rotations. So we're not going to go into it now, but do keep an eye out on our channel for a future video. So now we've got our bar rotation and our shifter position set to where we want it. Now you're in a good position to actually assess the reach of the bike, because sometimes this is all that's needed to make a really long reach into a more appropriate reach for that person's body. Instead of going down, changing stems and bars and removing spacers and adding spacers, normally it's just around positioning the components that you've got properly before you go and test what stem length you need, what bar reach you need, what spacer stack you should have. So make sure you do this first before thinking about all of those things, because it could save you a lot of time and potentially a lot of money as well. If you enjoyed this video, please click like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that it helps more people like you find content like this.